Welcome to the release of the 2022 D2Football.com Elite 100 team. With Chuck Bittner and Matt Witwicky, I am Brandon Meisner. Thank you for joining us. For every year since 2000, we have released a team that we consider to be the top 100 players in Division II. This year is no different. We would put this team together in the manner that we would if we we're going to go try to beat a team from another division or any team in college football. We have squad members, and we also have members of the team that are ranked on our first and second team. But nonetheless, a squad member would be what some would consider honorable mention, but we consider that to be an honor just to be on this team, comprised of players of less than 1% of players that played in Division II this year. So with that said, let's get started.
Defensive back.
We have Amos Coleman from Texas A&M Kingsville, Darius Gaines from Western Colorado, Trey Morrison from Wingate, Patrick Rogers from Central Washington, Joey Sinclair from Western Oregon, and Eli Weber from Augustana.
Yeah, and sometimes it's difficult to quantify statistics for defensive backs because a lot of times the best performing defensive backs have the ball going in a different direction from them. But one of the players on this list who actually had the ball come his way quite a bit was Trey Morrison from Wingate. And the ball went his way quite a bit. And I think a lot of opposing teams regretted that. He actually led the country in passes defended and passes broken up, and also had 5 interceptions. So probably some players that wish that they could take a few of those back.
Chuck, another guy that I noticed on this list here, obviously Joey Sinclair, safety for Western Oregon, underrated defense that down the stretch ended up winning games against West Texas, Central Washington, Kingsville, and others. He was kind of a do-everything safety for the squad. Ends up with 65 tackles, 6 picks, 2 of them he brought back for scores. Kind of a guy who, sideline to sideline defender. Under the radar for a lot of people. Then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't speak to one of my guys here that I've followed for years, Eli Weber, that we have here on the page. And, Weber had 3 straight years of 50-plus tackles. Is the kind of guy that you can really use, anywhere in the back of that defense, whether it's at safety or going up and playing him at backer. Not a lot of safeties were looking to come and fill the hole right when Thurl Reisdorfer is trying to run for a touchdown and he's coming up and throwing a shoulder at him. So, really a great ball player, and I'm going to be interested to see what his future holds as well.
Linebacker.
Our squad members are Michael Anderson of West Alabama, Malik Hall of Southeastern Oklahoma, Jacob Hole of Mercyhurst, Jalen Humphrey of Kentucky Wesleyan, Jalen Parnell at Western Oregon, PJ Sarwinski at Pittsburgh State, Ben Stratman from Missouri S&T, and Jackson Taylor at Westchester.
Brandon, when I look at this list, the first name I kind of jumps off to me is Michael Anderson at West Alabama. 6 foot, 206-pound backer that ended up having 96 stops this year for what was the best defense in the Gulf South Conference. A player like that who also led his conference in solo tackles is a guy certainly very well deserving on our list, and I'm glad we have him recognized here.
A couple players on this list are here for the second year in a row. Ben Stratman from Missouri S&T. He was the GLVC Defensive Player of the Year and also has led the conference in both sacks and tackles for loss in each of the last 2 seasons. Also the first S&T player ever to have 2 seasons with at least 20-plus tackles for loss. So a great career for Ben Stratman at Missouri S&T, and Jackson Taylor at Westchester, a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year in the PSAC East. This is a player I got to see a couple of times in person this year. Plays with a very high motor, makes his presence known in all aspects of the game, and also a finalist for the Cliff Harris Award as the top defensive player in the nation.
And one player I'd like to mention is PJ Sarwinski from Pittsburgh State. He's been a tough-nosed, hard-nosed player at Pitt State the entire career. This year, he helped Pitt rebound and make the playoffs and win the MIAA. So he's a guy and, the kind of player that doesn't necessarily get a lot of accolades because Pitt hasn't been at the level that they have in the past, but he's a player that anybody would love to have on their team.
Defensive line.
Charlie Cleveland of Tiffin, Seti Deshiel II of Bentley, Lubert Donalis of Benedict, Elijah Green of Northwest Missouri, DJ Horn of Wingate, Andre Jefferson of Lenore-Rhine, Zolly Kaplan from Bemidji State, and Hunter O'Connor of Chadron State.
You know, a defense that really took some people by surprise this year was the Benedict Tigers. They were one of the best defensive units in the nation throughout the entire season. And Lubert Denalis from Benedict was really the key cog on that defense. He was the SIAC Defensive Player of the Year. Just had an outstanding season leading that defense. They were one of the surprise teams of the entire season, and he was really a standout on that defensive unit. And DJ Horn from Wingate was the Super Region 2 Defensive Player of the Year. Really came into his own as a redshirt senior. He's been a good player throughout his entire career, but this ended up being an outstanding season for him. 20 tackles for loss, 11 sacks, 11 quarterback hurries. Great performance from him, and again, Super Region 2 Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, Chuck, on the list here for me, Hunter O'Connor from Chadron State that we have in the bottom right of our graphic. He kind of quietly had a heck of a season for the program. They had he was second in sacks in the country with 16, fourth in the country in tackles for loss, and is just a sophomore. So he's a guy that we're going to have to look out for in future years.
And one player I think that we should definitely mention is Zolly Kaplan from Bemidji State. He's a player who kind of moved to a different position. He was kind of an outside backer, moved to DN. And after maybe what some might consider a slow start, he really started to excel at the end and definitely deserves to be on this team.
Offensive line.
Our squad members on the offensive line are Xavier Kaysen from Emporia State, Trace Jeffries from Pittsburgh State, Adam Sealer at Ferris State, Dalton Simpler from West Florida, Peyton Stafford from Ouachita Baptist, Cameron Thomason at Limestone, Kenny Thomason at McKendree, and Corey Woodruff from Pittsburgh State.
A lot of good players on this list, obviously, Brandon. I'm looking at Adam Sealer when I see this list pop on up. The leader of what was essentially a young offensive line for Ferris this year. They took a little bit of time to kind of gel and get things rolling. But by the time we got to the playoffs, this huge offensive line that averaged, 320 across, he was kind of their leader. And with that, essentially ended up being the leader for the best team in the country.
Kenny Thomason from McKendree is a player I'm happy to see on this list. He was nominated for the Gene Upshaw Award, which goes to the nation's top lineman. He was one of 10 nominees in Super Region 3. He started 45 games in his career at McKendree, and this past season helped them to one of the best offensive performances in school history. And Corey Woodruff from Pittsburgh State is one of the biggest players on this team at 6'5", 349. A very rare accomplishment for him. He is a 5-time all-conference player during his college career. 2 as a member of the Gorillas in the MIAA, and he actually had 3 all-conference nominations as a member of the team at Briarcliff in the NAIA, having played a spring season there as well. So a rare achievement with 5 all-conference awards for Corey Woodruff.
Tight end.
At tight end, we have 2 players, Dagan Ranks from Colorado Mesa and Tice Nelson from Mars Hill.
Tice Nelson at Mars Hill is a player I got to see quite a few times over the last few years. He's a little bit of a do-everything kind of a player. He has really soft hands as a pass catcher at the tight end position, but also is utilized in a lot of different ways. He lines up in that fullback H-back position quite a bit as a lead blocker, carries the ball out of the backfield a couple of times, and also has thrown a few passes in his career as well. So really one of the best offensive players in the South Atlantic Conference for the past couple of years, and has been one of the best tight ends in the nation really since his freshman year.
Wide receiver.
We have Gerard Bowie from Concord, Jeremiah Bridges from South Dakota Mines, Marquise Gray from Southeastern Oklahoma, Danny Kittner from Mary, and Isaac Tesla from Hillsdale.
Gerard Bowie actually led the nation in total receptions and receiving yards, and was one of 9 finalists for the Harlan Hill Trophy in a very explosive offense for Concord. So a good honor for him. Marquise Gray at Southeastern Oklahoma, he kind of been a role player for the last couple of years in that Savage Storm offense, but boy, he had a huge season. Finished 4th in the nation in receiving yards and 3rd in receiving touchdowns in an offense that really had it rolling at times this year. for Southeastern Oklahoma. And Danny Kittner at Mary, numbers down a little bit this year for him, but just an exceptional player. Had another really good season. The standard for him is very, very high. So when we say his numbers are down, it's not down very far from an All-America type of performance. And Isaac Tiesla at Hillsdale, 19 and a half yards per catch. That's a really big number for a player that had 68 receptions throughout the season.
Running back.
We have Toriano Clinton from Indianapolis, Thurl Reisdorfer from Sioux Falls, Trey Stewart from Limestone, Jordan Terrell from Barton, and Emmanuel Wilson from Fort Valley.
Yeah, Brandon, on this list here, Thurl Reisdorfer is a guy that I've had a chance to cover over the last few seasons and had another big year. I mean, this is his third straight season of 1,000 yards plus. And in this case here, he averaged over 120 yards a game, 18 scores. And, the Cougars had themselves a strong season until they kind of, fell a little bit at the end. But I tell you, he was the guy that you had to stop on that squad and the best running back in the Northern Sun for me this season. Emmanuel Wilson's another guy that kind of jumps off the page for me here. A guy who's a legit NFL prospect. And averaged over 130 yards a game, 17 scores from Fort Valley. And I'm glad to see him recognized here on our squad as well.
I think it's important to point out, guys, that Toriano Clinton was injured much of the year. In fact, much of last year. One of the most explosive players in the country, and likely would have finished a little higher on this list had he not had to deal with all those injuries.
Quarterback.
We have Brandon Alt from Bemidji State, TJ Davis from Nebraska Kearney, Harrison Frost from West Georgia, Jack Mangle from Concord, Turner Pullen from McKendree, and Patrick Shegog from Delta State.
Brandon, I don't know if there's a player who really fits the description of gunslinger any more than the guy in the top left corner of our graphic, Brandon Alt. Over 300 yards a game through the air, 38 touchdown passes, which was good for fourth nationally. Just a guy who really throws the ball down the field and was instrumental in the success Bemidji State's had the last few seasons. A guy who still has another year left, so he'll be an exciting guy to continue to watch. Another guy who I look at on the page here is Patrick Shegog from Delta State, dual threat quarterback who had almost 800 yards on the ground with another, 17 scores to go with in that path. Fantastic quarterback who was really a big piece of why they had such a good year, co-champs in the Gulf South, and great to see him recognized here for that strong season.
And Jack Mangle from Concord actually finished the season after all the games had been played, including the playoffs. Jack Mangle finished the year ranked number 1 in passing yards per game, had a huge second half of the year. He finished out the season with 6 straight games where he passed for more than 350 yards, which is quite remarkable.
Special teams.
And our final 2 squad members are all-purpose players Marcus Taylor from Ferris State and Trey Vaval from Minnesota State. We also have second team members with kicker David Bartholomew, East Stroudsburg, punter Miles Prosser from North Greenville, and all-purpose player James Letcher Jr. from Washburn, as well as first teamers, kicker Nick Herber from Delta State, punter Ethan Evans from Wingate, and all-purpose player Keelan Harris from Oklahoma Baptist.
Brandon, a lot of interesting athletes on this page. When we take a look at Marcus Taylor from Ferris State, a guy who made a transition based on team need from wideout to being their main running back. And that all said, he ended up going ahead in the last few games and going for over 100 yards on the ground while always being a threat anytime he touched the football. Really electric football player, and a guy that we felt the need to have on this page because we think that he's the best offensive player on the Ferris State team that won a national title. Now, as I take a look at some of the other guys here, we've got Trey Vaval, and as I go ahead and I look at him, he was a guy who was a constant threat in the kick return game, and a guy who on punts a lot of times would flip that into instant offense, and a guy that people would try and stay away from in the Northern Sun. So a real threat there, and Colorado Mines got to see that a little bit in the playoffs. And another guy, Keelan Harris from Oklahoma Baptist is a guy that's actually at the top of the charts in regards to D2 prospects by our guy, Josh Buchanan, the scout. And he's a guy who's put back-to-back 1,000-yard receiving seasons together while also being a very capable kick returner. So that's a name to kind of look out for in the future as well.
In the kicking game, Miles Prosser was actually the last player onto our Elite 100 preseason watch list. He literally was player number 100 that made that list, but no doubt making the team at the end of the season. He actually led the nation in punting and had the most punts over 50 yards, while Ethan Evans from Wingate was right behind him, just a shade behind him in average punting or average yards per punt, and had the most punts downed inside the 20-yard line. Evans also had a really good year place kicking as well. He actually did so well this season, he earned an invitation to play in the East-West Shrine Bowl, which is one of the oldest and most prestigious scouting all-star games that there is.
Defensive back.
On our second team, we have Nazir Forcurine from Grand Valley, Kevin Larkins Jr. from Livingstone, Kahari Watson from Angelo State, Nick Whiteside from Saginaw Valley. On the first team, we have Tristan Rankin from Mars Hill, Sean Stevens from West Liberty, DJ Sturgis from Missouri Western, and Darius Swanson from Nebraska Kearney.
Yeah, Brandon, when I take a look at this list, I see Kahari Watson from Angelo State. He is a very deserving member to be on this grouping because, you take a look at him. They led Division II in interceptions this year with 23, and he was frankly the top player in the back half of that defense. And then we also take a look at Darius Swanson, a guy who had a similar role for Kearney, but really a do-everything guy in the back half there, and a guy who could lead a team in tackles but also end up getting a pick. So a pretty complete football player and a great grouping here that we have.
Linebacker.
On our second team, we have Deron Allman from Angelo State, Michael Ayers from Ashland, and Clay Schuffner from Winona State. On the first team, we have Jalen McDuffie from Seton Hill, Nathan Moore from Notre Dame, and Abe Swanson from Grand Valley.
This is a pretty deep list at the linebacker position. A lot of really outstanding players here. Michael Ayers from Ashland is the type of player that just makes his presence known in all aspects of defensive play. He's a pass rusher, a pass defender, a run stopper. He can really do everything that you want a linebacker to be able to do. He's a nominee for the Cliff Harris Award and actually a two-time GMAC Defensive Player of the Year. Jalen McDuffie from Seton Hill, it's a program that we don't really get to talk a lot about. They had a really tough start to the season. Nothing really working for them. Towards the second half of the year, really started to turn it around defensively. They got a lot better on that side of the ball, and it was really Jalen McDuffie, the outstanding linebacker, that really helped to spur that turnaround, especially in the last month of the season. They just got a lot better in all aspects of the game, but mostly on that defensive side of the ball, and he really was the key cog in that. Ended up finishing the year with 21 tackles for loss and 11 sacks as well. And Abe Swanson from Grand Valley is probably the best linebacker in Division II this year. Matt Mitchell told us at the start of the season that he's one of the best that they've ever had. And if you know Grand Valley football, that's really saying something. And he actually finished the season with 95 total tackles, which is extremely productive for a player on a defense that's so good at getting off the field. Usually a player that gets to that number is on a defensive unit that's playing a lot of snaps, and we know that's not the case at Grand Valley. So really outstanding season for him as well.
Defensive line.
We also have an extremely talented group on the defensive line. On the second team is DJ Adediwura from Slippery Rock, Andrew Farmer from Lane, Deshaun McCarthy from East Stroudsburg, and Joshua Pryor from Bowie State. On the first team are Trey Botts from CSU Pueblo, Zach Howard from Northwest Missouri, Ian Marshall from Northern State, and Caleb Murphy from Ferris State.
Brandon, one name that kind of jumps off the page to me is Joshua Pryor at Bowie State. He's a guy that we've had on this team for years now. I don't know if there's any one player on this list that has probably been planned around more by offensive coordinators in their league than Josh Pryor, because when he first came on the scene, right away, 2000, what was it, 18, I believe it was, he had 25 TFLs, 15 sacks, those kind of numbers, and immediately put everybody in the CIAA on warning. And defenses have done everything they can to kind of play around him now to the point where we know how good a football player he is. And I'm really looking forward for him to get a chance, potentially at the next level, because he's such a difference maker and a great athlete at the D-line position. I also see Ian Marshall on the page here, Brandon, who's a defensive tackle who had 24 and a half TFLs, which isn't a real common thing, but he's a very elusive, 6'1", 270-pound defender for Northern State, a guy who had transferred in from Oklahoma State, has this, has really done well, and I'm looking to see kind of where he goes in the future as well.
And one guy I'd like to mention is Zach Howard from Northwest Missouri. Elijah Green's gotten all of the accolades this year because of the numbers that he's put up. But a big reason he put up those numbers outside his own development was the fact that he's playing next to Zach Howard. Zach Howard has been a force for 4 years at Northwest Missouri, and in fact played as a true freshman for the Bearcats. And, as most of you all know, Northwest Missouri is one of the top D lines in the country every year. And the fact that he was able to play as a true freshman says a ton about Zach Howard.
Offensive line.
On the second team offensive line, we have Matt Armendariz from Colorado Mines, Jackie Chin from Pace, Michael Jarrell from Findlay, Blake Larson from Augustana, Nicholas Millsop from Delta State. On the first team, we have Gottlieb Aidze from Frostburg State, Quentin Barrow from Grand Valley, Joey Fisher from Shepherd, Brent Lang from Minnesota Duluth, and BJ Wilson from Quincy.
The first player on this list that stands out to me is Matt Armendariz, the center for Colorado School of Mines. He was the Remington Award winner a year ago, which goes to the top center in the nation. He's probably very likely to repeat that honor this year. Just a great leader. He is kind of that quarterback of the offensive line and is extremely effective run blocker and pass blocker, and just a really strong force at the center of that Mines offensive line. Michael Jarrell from Findlay, very strong upper body kind of a player, moves defenders around really well with his long wingspan, probably has even a little bit more power than his weight might indicate. A really dominant player for the Findlay Oilers. And the player on this list, I think, is probably the best offensive lineman in Division II this year, was Quentin Barrow from Grand Valley State. A player that had the talent and the size and the power to really win one-on-one matchups with some of the best defensive players in Division II this season, and probably somebody who's going to get a lot of attention from the pro scouts.
Chuck, some names that really caught my attention. Nicholas Millsop from Delta State, huge frame, 6'8", 325. He caught my attention the first time I, turned on Delta State. And I had one of the coaches in their league mentioned to me that this is the strongest guy that we went up against all year. The players were literally coming off talking about it. And they mentioned that he's maybe one of the best they've seen at our level. So, really good football player there. BJ Wilson also from Quincy, 6'6", 320. He is, kind of towards the top of the O-line prospects when it comes to the NFL. It'll be interesting to see how he and that big frame end up, going towards the NFL, and if he's able to kind of meet those aspirations.
Tight end.
We moved to tight end where, quite frankly, you could have put all of these guys in any order and it would have made sense, but we ended up with this order. Second team, Brian Walker from Shepherd, and our first teamer is Kyle Morlock from Shorter.
Yeah, Brendan, Brian Walker ended up being a really good pass catcher for Shepherd, and a guy that was really able to help the squad out when they started getting more injuries at wideout. He became a bit of a security blanket in that, Shepherd passing game for Tyson Bagent, and a guy who made some big plays down the stretch. We also have Kyle Morlock on the list here. Huge frame, 6'7", 245. I recall watching him earlier in the season when Shorter played Valdosta, and boy, I tell you, he stood out to me. Real big frame, guy who can block, but also a guy who can catch the football. Scored 6 times this year on passes, and was also able to, catch the ball and had a few games where he looked like a wideout. 5-6 catches, 100 yards type of stuff. A real prospect is what I see with him.
Wide receiver.
An explosive group of players highlights our wide receivers. On the second team are Dwayne Brown from IUP and David Durden from West Florida. And on the first team are Brendan Bolio from Bemidji State and Xavier Malone from Henderson State.
Brandon, with this group that we have here, I see Brendan Bolio, a guy who was really the go-to guy for Bemidji State. Even in the playoffs, he ends up scoring 3-4 times and really triggers them. And even in their loss, he scored their lone touchdown. A guy who ended up being second in the country in receiving yards. First in scores, 19 touchdowns for a wideout. Just a tremendous year for Bolio. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Shane Zylstra from Mankato of the past, similar frame and athleticism. You also have Xavier Malone on the page here, 5'9", 180 pounds, kind of a smaller wideout, but a really electric player. And he ended up having, 1,300 yards receiving, ends up having 15 scores. They only ended up playing 11 games because they lost the Battle of the Ravine. But I tell you, at the end of the season there against Ouachita, he had 9 grabs for 138 yards, 2 scores, and really proved the kind of player he is, certainly deserving to be this high on the list.
Running back.
On the second team, we have Mario Anderson from Newberry and Ronnie Brown from Shepherd. And our first teamers are Jada Byers from Virginia Union and TJ Cole from Ouachita Baptist.
Yeah, 3 of these 4 players were finalists for the Harlan Hill Trophy, 3 of the 9 finalists. And the one here that was not might have had the best season of them all. Ronnie Brown from Shepherd finished his year with 1,800 rushing yards, almost 600 receiving yards on 56 catches, and really towards the end of the year was instrumental in getting Shepherd into the national semifinals. In fact, I don't think they would have made that deep playoff run without him. They had a lot of injury problems at the receiver position. Ronnie Brown really was able to step up and carry more of the load, both as a rusher and a pass receiver, while Shepherd was dealing with some of those injuries. So just an incredible all-around performance. Also had a lot of kickoff return yardage as well.
Oh.
So just an overall incredible performance from him. Jada Byers from Virginia Union actually led the nation in rushing, both yards per game and total rushing yards. And he actually led almost the entire season in both of those categories, which is a really difficult thing to do. As really one of our best running backs in D2 this season. And TJ Cole from Ouachita Baptist finished his career by setting single season records for rushing yards and touchdowns in a single season, and also set the career record for touchdowns rushing at Ouachita Baptist.
Quarterback.
And most of the year, there was little doubt who the 2 quarterbacks would be. The order was the only thing in question. But at the end of the season, Tyson Bagent is our second team quarterback, while John Matoka from Colorado Mines is our first team quarterback.
Yeah, Tyson Bagent, the Harlan Hill winner from a year ago, closed out his college career as one of the best quarterbacks in Division II history. And I really can't condense his career down into a sentence or two, but suffice it to say, he set all kinds of career records this season, whether it be program records, conference records, and several Division II records, and a few NCAA All Divisions records. Just a remarkable player for his entire career, and this season was just another in that progression for him. More than 4,500 passing yards with 41 touchdowns and just 8 interceptions. Finished in the top 5 in just about all the passing categories that the NCAA tracks. And as a result of his outstanding season, he actually received an invitation to the Reese's Senior Bowl, which is really the most elite of all of the college all-star games. So that's going to be a tremendous scouting opportunity for him to perform in front of a lot of important people in the NFL.
Chuck, you can just see in this picture here the kind of energy that John Matoka played with, and what an outstanding year he had. I mean, it's almost like he kept getting better as they were moving into the playoffs. And then, games like they had against Pueblo in the playoffs, and Mankato and Angelo, where he's putting up, 400 yards worth of total offense, 5-6 touchdowns a game. Guy ends up finishing with over 5,200 total yards for the season, which is staggering. There's no question as to that he should be our first team quarterback, and just a truly memorable season for John Matocha and his squad as he took them obviously to the national title game.
Defensive Player of the Year.
For most of the season, there has been little doubt that the defensive player of the year would be Caleb Murphy from Ferris State.
Yeah, Brandon, just a few weeks into the season, he became the sack leader statistically nationally, and he never gave it up after that. I mean, he was always, he almost finished with 2 sacks a game, which is crazy when you think about it. Ends up with 25 and a half, a total of 193 yards lost by opponents on those sacks. That's a staggering number. But, when we watch a lot of D2 football like we do, guys, he's the kind of guy where you just watch a little bit and you say, he's just different. His speed coming off the edge and his ability to track down quarterbacks or even ball carriers, it was just different to watch this year. I thought that he was an absolute slam dunk for this award, and he had a truly outstanding season.
Offensive Player of the Year.
Unlike the Defensive Player of the Year, this one took a lot longer to decide. But about week 8 or 9 of the regular season, it really felt like John Matocha was going to finish as the nation's top offensive player.
Yeah, I think by the time we got to the end of the regular season, many of us here on the team at D2 Football felt that this was the Harlan Hill Trophy winner, and a lot of us felt very convicted in that belief, and certainly we were proven right. And I don't think there's any doubt that he is the Offensive Player of the Year. And Whit had a lot of great insight about his performance on the field and the skill set and the talent that he brings, but I think the leadership that he brings to that offense and that entire team is something that's really important to talk about, because it's a 12 to 15 week journey to win an award like the Harlan Hill Trophy or a Player of the Year type of award. And it really did start all the way back in week 1. If you think about their, incredibly tough game that they opened the season with at Grand Valley State, they fell behind 17-0 in that game in the second half. And he actually rallied them from behind with an incredible passing performance and some really tough rushing yards, and just made some incredible plays that really set the stage for what his season was going to be individually and what mine season was going to be as a team and as a unit. And that really got things started. And even though that game was a loss and they started the season 0-2, it was really his leadership and his performance within the team that really propelled them to overcome that and get all the way to the national championship game. So really just an incredible performance from him, both on the field, in the huddle, in the locker room. So it's tough to win an award like this, to be the Offensive Player of the Year, and of course the Harlan Hill Trophy winner as well. But I don't think there was anybody more deserving this year than John Matocha of Colorado Mines.
Coach of the Year.
And our last individual award goes to the 2022 Coach of the Year, Tony Annese from Ferris State.
Yeah, Brandon, we looked through some different candidates that we thought were right there in this conversation with Coach Annese, but Coach Annese ended up winning out, frankly, because of the fact that if you take a look, I really thought that he had to do a whole lot more coaching this year than he had to do a year ago when they won the championship, because of the fact that you take a look at the different challenges that they were presented this season. Whether it was him moving, Marcus Taylor from receiver to running back and making some changes in their offense as a result of it to really feature him like he wanted to, while also, you got guys like Malik Mitchell and Evan Cummins and others who were getting dinged up at the quarterback position. So they bring in Gulker. He ends up helping out, but he had to go ahead and really juggle things for a long time this season, while at the same time waiting for his offensive line to get to the point where they really needed to be for them to go on a run. And all of that kind of came together for them in the postseason after having a setback with Grand Valley a little bit earlier in the year. You can't say enough about the job that he did. and how well they ended up performing. Chuck, when I mentioned a moment ago some of the other guys that we had in that conversation, who are some of the ones that you think of?
Well, I think Coach Anise was the right choice here for Coach of the Year. Sometimes the coaches that end up achieving what's expected, which Ferris State being a national championship game, we kind of expect that at this point. Sometimes the coaches that get to that point when we expect it, we don't necessarily acknowledge how good of a job they did throughout the season. And I think he did a great job highlighting that this probably was one of his best coaching jobs at Ferris State. But a lot of times these awards tend to really focus on coaches that either did something that was really unexpected or led a big turnaround. And there were a couple that really stood out this year. Chennis Berry from Benedict, that team really surprised a lot of people. The Tigers finished 11-0 in the regular season, won the SIAC championship for the first time ever at Benedict College, a huge accomplishment for them, and earned the #1 seed heading into the playoffs, which was something that really took Super Region 2 by surprise. Not many people expected that coming into the season. So a really incredible coaching performance from Coach Berry at Benedict. And as far as completely surpassing all expectations, Mike Fury at Limestone actually returned to Gaffney, South Carolina for his second tenure with the Limestone Saints program. 12 months ago, this was a program that had almost nothing going for them. They had finished a winless season. They've only been playing football for a handful of seasons there, but they really just didn't have anything working for them. They were winless in 2021, went through a late cycle coaching change. Mike Fury comes in and just completely infuses so much life into that program. They end up winning 8 games this year. It was the first winning season in Limestone program history, and they got into the playoffs, which if you'd have told people 12 months ago that Limestone was going to be in the playoffs in 2022, there are 0 people that would have believed that, including a lot of people in Gaffney, I think. So it's an unbelievable coaching performance for him and doing something that really shocked a lot of people around Division II.
Chuck, as I took a look, we had discussions, and I think we had we landed on about 5 names total that we really had kind of in that last group. 2 other names that I thought that were really worthy of discussion here were Brandon Moore from Colorado Mines. He takes over a squad, first-year coach, ends up, they lose the first 2 games. Then, oh, by the way, he wins the next 13. And they end up in the national title. And, in the national title contest there, I mean, they ran into a buzzsaw with Ferris, but the fact that he got them there says a whole lot about how he was able to keep things steady with that program. Now, did they have a really good squad? Of course they did, and a lot of experience on it. But that doesn't guarantee you that you're going to win 13 in a row to get yourself in. So I thought he did a tremendous job. And then Todd Cooley at Delta State, takes a program that was 5-6 the year previous. They end up going 11-2, co-champs of the Gulf South. They beat West Florida during the regular season. They end up being a top 10 program nationally by the end of the year. I mean, I think you can really say a whole lot about how well he did with that program this year in a really tough conference.
All right. Well, there you have it, folks. That's the 2022 Elite 100 team brought to you by D2Football.com. For Chuck Bittner and Matt Wawicki, I'm Brandon Meisner. Thanks for watching.